Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. Feel free to use the chat box for any questions. If we are unable to get to them during the presentation, they will be answered at the end. My name is Maddie Acey. I will be your host for this webinar. Today, we will be pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation titled Maximizing Your Use of Google for Genealogists. James Tanner has a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's degree in linguistics from the University of Utah. He received a Juris Doctor degree in law at Arizona State University. He served for 2 years as an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army and 39 years as an Arizona trial attorney. He has previously owned a retail computer business and an Apple Macintosh software company. James has over 30 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. He has presented at expos and conferences around the U.S. and Canada. James has 7 children and 33 grandchildren.
Howdy, this is James Tanner. We're here for another Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar. This one was entitled Maximizing Your Use of Google for Genealogists. This series of webinars is advertised on the BYU Family History Library website, which is part of byu.edu, the Brigham Young University website. When the presentations are completed, the recordings of the video and audio are uploaded to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel on youtube.com, where you can view well over 150 of our previous presentations and webinars. Google is obviously a gigantic company, has influence worldwide, has basically become a standard term for searching. We talk about Googling something, the name of the company has passed into the languages of our cultures around the world. But for genealogists, Google presents some unique and very advantageous programs that are part of the Google that, and the purpose, of course, today is to make you aware of the programs that might exist. Now, first of all, we have to understand that Google is all about searching for websites, searching websites on the internet. There are hundreds of millions, perhaps now billions of websites out there. And Google is the largest and most effective tool for searching into all of these nooks and crannies of the internet out there. It's given that genealogists need to find records. That's kind of the purpose of our existence, is to investigate, document, and record our family histories, our pedigrees, and the additional information and stories and photos and other things that go along with our family. And to find those records, we historically would have to go to the locations where they were kept. In the old days, if I want to go back to the really old days, the genealogists who were dedicated would be out writing letters and contacting relatives and contacting places that might have stored the records, searching for records and waiting for sometimes weeks or months or even years for responses to their letters. Today, because of a vast digitalization project that's going on worldwide, many of the historical records are now online and searchable. So that gives you the key to why a search is important and necessary for finding these records. We also recognize that websites have records. We could call up a few names like Family Search and MyHeritage and Ancestry and Find My Past and Fold3 and on, a whole long list of websites that have records, some more, some less, and obviously in other countries around the world besides the United States, there are other millions and millions of records online. So genealogists should learn how to use Google searches to find these records. That kind of is a given quantity. here in the world of genealogy today. Understanding this, as I mentioned, that Google is a bundle of tools. We focus, I think, primarily on the search capability, which of course is the most obvious and most um, integral part of Google's online programs. We also need to recognize another thing, and that is that Google is basically an advertising company. The whole concept here and how they have achieved market dominance and also become one of the largest companies of companies in the world as far as their finances are concerned is based on the fact that they sell advertising. Um, their revenue comes from millions and millions of ads all over the world. But in addition to this, they have an interesting company philosophy that has created what are essentially free, what they call Google Apps or applications, programs. Free in the sense of anything that is online. You have to have a computer, you have to pay for an internet connection, you have to spend the time to use it, but there are no additional charges made to the user. They're basically programs that they provide without a specific cost or subscription cost. Um, so first of all, we need to know where all these programs are on Google. This is the very understated classic Google search page. Um, I think most of us who have used the computer for any period of time now realize that what we're supposed to do here is type in something that we want to find. But when this came up originally, it wasn't that obvious. And a lot of people were were left just sitting there staring at this, not knowing exactly what they were supposed to do. So we'll go up here to the Google startup screen, and we'll have a look at let me get this going here. Up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little grid. Now, this little grid, if you zoom in on it, there's a couple of choices here already. One is Gmail, which we're not going to talk about. That's obviously useful to genealogists, but not necessarily focused on genealogical issues. Images is also helpful to genealogists, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. And then the other is the grid itself. When you click on that grid, you get a selection of some of the Google offerings here. And we'll focus on the ones that I have found to be more helpful to genealogists. It's not to say that the other ones are not helpful. A calendar is a calendar, and it's helpful if you need a calendar, which probably all of us do. But it's not specifically a tool that we would be interested in having in working as genealogists. I guess we do look at calendars, but I can't think of much excitement there. If you click down at the bottom of the page, it says more, and then there are another bunch of selections of icons that are links to different programs. Some of these are also extremely valuable and are directly related to genealogy. For example, here again, shopping, wallet, and finance are probably not, may be very, very helpful to us individually, but are not directly related to genealogical activities per se. Okay, but even down at the bottom of that lit screen, there's even more. And when you click on that, you get a long list, which most people, I'm afraid, are not familiar with, of all of the Google programs that are current. Now, something important to understand is that Google from time to time adds and removes programs. So I was surprised when I went through this list in preparation for this particular webinar that some of the things that I had been familiar with in the past had vanished, and other programs which I did not know about at all had appeared. And it turned out that some of those programs were interesting and perhaps useful from a genealogical standpoint. Well, so we're going to go down through this list, and of course my selection is a little bit arbitrary because it's what I've become acquainted with and what I'm interested in. So I would strongly suggest that you explore these programs. You may find some things about Google and programs that you have perhaps even paying for now that you can substitute Google programs that will work perfectly adequately for what you want to do and accomplish. Um, there's always a concern here, and I might express this concern that depending on what you would call free programs can be, in a sense, a trap. Um, this trap is that, of course, if they drop the program or move to some other format or whatever, that you would have to migrate. Now, the reality of working on computers over the long years in the past that we've had them, now I've been working on computers for almost 50 years. Uh, the reality is that that technology changes constantly, and that these programs are going to evolve and they will change, and that is one of the challenges of working with computers, and particularly working as genealogists who aren't really necessarily focused in on the idea that everything they're going to do changes every day. Okay, well, let's move on. First of all, we can't possibly cover all those programs, so I did have to make a selection. So here what we need to do is to take time to explore all the tools that are there. It's really something that would be to your benefit to look into and explore these various tools from Google. So let's look at some of the more useful ones. I'm just going to list them here real quick at the beginning so you can get an idea of the variety of programs that then I'll go back through and highlight them. First of all, and most importantly, we have Google Search. Then we have image search, which I alluded to a moment ago. We have Translate, which is a program that instantly translates text and web pages and files in over 50 languages. The over 50 languages, by the way, is a vast understatement because Google just barely announced that they are now translating into 103 languages. So that means that if you write something in Tagalog from the Philippines, you can translate that into Croat in Serbia. Not that you might want to do that, but that's what happens. Okay, maps, absolutely a basic tool for genealogists. In this case, Google Maps have become an integral part of my genealogical research. Google Earth is an extension of Google Maps. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two programs. In reality today, Google Earth is integrated into Google Maps. When you look at a satellite view, you are starting into Google Earth, but there is actually a separate program or app for Google Earth that needs to be downloaded and added to your computer. Docs is, I put Docs in here because I see this as being a method of working with online programs that substitutes for traditional purchased or subscription programs that may now be available. So this is one option. It isn't necessarily a solution for every person. But it is an option that genealogists need to be aware of because of the way that will work. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail. Drive and Docs work together. There's actually a whole set of documents. The Docs program is essentially word processing, and Google has a Drive program, which is a storage place. Today, if you simply sign into Google, you get a free Gmail account, obviously, and if you have a Gmail account, then you've already signed into Google. But you may not be aware that on Google Drive you have 1 terabyte of free storage from Google. So this significant issue here for most people could use Google Drive or some of the other online storage uh, things and back up their information, their storage spaces, and back up their information much better than they do now. Books, we'll talk about Google Books. This is a subject that's near and dear to the heart of any genealogist, and there should be. And this will become an important part of what we talk about. This is one that you probably are not aware of. I find very, very few people who are aware of this, even in an academic environment, and that's Google Scholar. And we'll go into that program. And actually, when I examined Google Scholar for the preparation here, I realized that they had added some features that were extremely interesting to genealogists that had not been there previously. We have blogs. That's something that, of course, that I've been intimately involved with for almost 10 years now. And there are a number, thousands of genealogy blogs out there with people putting in a lot of very, very useful information. And then YouTube, which I think is the last one that we'll talk about, but probably the one that people would think would be the least helpful to genealogists and maybe the best. The very fact that I announced at the beginning of this presentation that all of these presentations were being recorded and uploaded to the YouTube for later viewing is an indication of how important YouTube has become as a method of communication and more extensive communication through audio and video presentations. Um, Very interesting program now. Obviously has a significant amount of let's just use the term correctly, garbage, that technical term there, meaning that this stuff is useless for any really good reason. But anyway, it's there. But if you can kind of self-filter everything that you use on the internet, then you can avoid some of the worst problems with YouTube. Okay, we're going to go back now and go through these in a little bit more detail. Web search. Here's how it works for genealogists. We search for the names and places of every person in our family tree. So as we get into starting to do research, just as a matter, I would urge people to kind of habitually, when they get a new name or they're looking for a new person or they get into their program, they just do a quick Google search for the person or the place that they're working on. On the odd chance, and possibly, and it does happen frequently, that more or new information has been added to the internet about that particular person. The answer here is you don't know if it's there if you don't look. And so if you just simply say, well, I searched that 5 years ago and I didn't find anything, and the answer is, yeah, well, yesterday it might have been a good idea to do that too. And also, when you're doing your searches, the idea here is to guess how someone recorded your ancestor's name on a website. And so you're going to use all sorts of tricks, alternative names, nicknames, short names, abbreviations, everything, and looking for your people. And that will help you to be successful in finding them. If you want to search a specific topic or specific string of words would be one way of expressing it, then you put the name in quotation marks for a specific search. And last, you can add qualifiers such as places or occupations. So let me give an example of that. If I were going to go search for one of my relatives, in this case, my great-grandfather, I would type in the quotation mark, Henry Martin Tanner, and end quote, and then Arizona. This tells Google that I am looking for Henry Martin Tanner, that string of words, those words in that order and containing those letters, and not just random Henrys, Martins, Tanners, Martin Tanners, Henry Tanners, and all different types of people. It also tells Google that I would like to find a website page where Henry Martin Tanner, the term Henry Martin Tanner, appears with the term Arizona. Okay, well that helps. So let me just show you what happens when I do that. Basically, I get a very focused uh, number of responses, and then I have to look carefully at the responses. I'm not looking just at the response itself, because it says there, like the first response says Henry Martin Tanner, Joseph City, Arizona pioneer, etc. That may tell me something, but I need to look at where that's coming from, and that's coming from Amazon. So what that means is that there's a book called Henry Martin Tanner, Joseph City, Arizona Pioneer, which I could then click on and go look on to see if I wanted to purchase the book on Amazon. The second one down is also Amazon, so we need to keep looking at that to see what's going on. The third one is also Amazon. By the time we get down to the fourth one, what we're looking at is my own blog. So in my case, when I'm on the internet constantly and adding information constantly every day to the internet, I have a tendency to search my own records all the time. So that's kind of an interesting thing, but we need to examine these responses as we get them to see where they're coming from as well as what they are. And you may have to click through quite a few before you find any new information, but I would not give up. Now, the number of results here, if I had made a more general search, of course, would be in the hundreds of thousands or millions. Okay, so let's move out. That was about 1,280 results in 0.52 seconds. Well, this brings up another observation, and this is that if you continue to do a lot of Google searches, you'll find that in almost all cases, not always, but the vast majority of the cases of your doing searches, that Google will cut off the search after about a half a second. So what happens is that there may be other results out there that you're not finding in the first half second of Google's search. You just need to know that there's a lot more out there. If I vary the terms here, for instance, if I put in Henry Martin Tanner Pioneer, or if I put in Henry Martin Tanner California, or anything else that was associated with my great-grandfather, I would get a completely different search each time from Google. And I may find things that did not come up under this original search. So basically finding things on Google using the search techniques is a process of varying the search terms through sit down and try to create an idea of how many different ways people could have referred to your ancestor, and then putting in all of those different possible combinations to come up with a search. Okay, now we're going to move over to image search. I realize we're going through some of these rather quickly, but we don't have an unlimited time. You do the same search for images that you do for a regular Google search. So when you sign into the Google Images icon there, click on that, then what happens is the screen turns into the Google Images search. Now, there's a couple of ways of searching, one of which is represented by the little camera icon there. That little camera icon indicates that you can upload a photo or an image to Google, and then Google will look at the image and try to match it to all the other images that it finds online. This is very helpful in some instances, particularly if I have no idea what I'm looking at in an image and I want to see who else has it, and maybe I have an explanation for it. Genealogists, for example, seems like a very interesting tool when you have an old photograph that you can't recognize. you don't know who the person is, and you want to see if you can identify the person or the people in the photograph. So you upload this to Google to see if someone else has already uploaded that photo and identified the people. It works. But in another sense, it doesn't work because old photographs are not very distinctive. And so when you have these old black and white uh, photos from the 1800s, for example, every one looks almost the same. And basically what you get on an image search is a whole bunch of copies of the same of old photographs rather than individually identified ones. But it does work for identifying another photo online that is the same as the one that you have, which is not impossible. Okay, but here you can do the same thing with Google Images that you can. You can also search for any person where the name appears with an image. So here, once again, I type in Henry Martin Tanner in Arizona, and I do the search, and I come up with a number of different documents. And as I go through there, I see here's a photo of Henry Tanner. Here's a picture of his grave marker. Here's a picture of his family when they were young and had 3 children. Here's another photo of my great-grandfather and another one. As I go through these, I will also find documents and anything else that people have digitized and put up online and identified along with my grandfather. Now, obviously, I have a whole page full of stuff. That's because my great-grandfather had a lot of children and a lot of descendants, and a lot of them are online talking about him. You may, as they say in the commercials, your results may vary. You may actually have either a lot more or a lot less uh, information about a particular ancestor. It's not unusual that you'll find nothing, but it doesn't hurt to search, and it's another tool you can use to find information. You may be very, very surprised at what you find. Uh, one thing I do suggest with images is that you do qualify the search and make them very specific. General searches on images will bring up images that are, let's call them less desirable or more disturbing, and probably not a good idea. So putting in the word genealogy is also helpful, but it's important to realize that this is not necessarily all of a positive experience here. Okay, so there could be many, many more images out there of Henry Tanner. Oh, well, one question that always comes up, let me go back to there for just a second, is where do all this stuff come from? Basically, these are pictures that have been uploaded, put on websites or blogs or even on Family Search Memories or many other programs that have left the access open to Google searches, and so they all appear here. And that's why you can see all sorts of interesting things online. Okay, now we're going to talk about Google Translate. Now, Translate is obviously, if all of your ancestors spoke English and you speak English, there's probably no reason to have Google Translate. But the nature of genealogy is that, at least here in the United States, most of our ancestors spoke a different language than some of our ancestors probably spoke a different language than English. And so we may need to translate records and documents and anything and many other things into different languages. Now here, what Google has done is add in all of these different languages for translation purposes. You'll notice things like Chinese and English and Afrikaans and Kurdish and all sorts of different languages here. Presently, Google's claim is that the language translate language ability of the program covers 99% of all the people online around the world. So there's only a few languages left that have an online presence that are significantly which are not available to Google presently. So how does this all work? Well, Basically, you type in, uh, you have a keyboard and an audio input and export. So you just type in the words that you want to have translated, for example, Spanish to English, English to Spanish, English to Danish, Danish to English, whatever you want to do, and or paste them in from a website or copy them off of a document. And the keyboards here actually give you all of those variation characters. These are online keyboards that you use with your mouse or your pointer, and they give you the ability to enter all those little diacritical marks and all the accents and everything and all the strange characters that may be available in any of these languages. So if you're trying to type into Hebrew, for example, then the keyboard will come up in Hebrew and it'll be typing from right to left and instead of from left to right, and you'll be entering Hebrew. So it's a way of translating, giving you the ability to translate. So, okay, so what I'm suggesting is that the words that you encounter as you're doing your research, like baptism, marriage, father, mother, death, burial, can then be translated directly into a language. Here I translated all these into Icelandic just for fun. I just figured out that was neat. Um, but the same thing works for any of the other languages listed by Google. Now, one of the questions that arises from, particularly from academics is, well, the translations aren't very good. My answer is, well, they're more than adequate for genealogists because really what we're looking for is the meaning usually of one small phrase or one word, and usually that helps. There are other translation services online, but by typing the word translate into your search, you'll come up with Google Translate because they always put their stuff first, and only logical. So here's a way to create a word list for doing genealogical research. So here's your instant genealogical word list. Okay, we're going to move again. This time we're going to move to maps. Google Maps is primarily, I think everybody, one of my relatives mentioned this, or one of my friends mentioned this yesterday, said, I don't know what we did before we had the maps on our phones, how we ever found anything. And my answer is we didn't, we were totally lost. But uh, this way you can get lost more quickly than we could previously. But then again, this is a very powerful genealogical tool. Um, One of the things that I talk about frequently and write about from time to time is the importance of focusing on the location where the events occurred in your ancestor's life. Records that are created for your to memorialize events in your ancestors' lives, anything from birth records to death records, and anything from land and property to court records to everything else, were created because your ancestor was involved in an event that occurred in a specific geographic location. The maps portion of Google gives us a valuable set of searching tools to search for and find locations. Okay, so um, I'm going to have to refer you out now at this point to the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. And we have a number of maps videos, very specific maps videos that show how maps can be used in the genealogical context and also involved um, with the with learning about how how the Google Maps program works. Okay, now the Google Earth program, as I mentioned, is a downloadable program. So when you go to online and look for Google Earth, you're going to find a download this. It will download it to your computer. It's free. Initially, when they started the program years ago, there was a free version and a purchase version, sort of an advanced copy. Basically, Google gave up on the advanced copy purchase sort of offering and incorporated everything into their free version, and so now everything's free. There is no purchased version of Earth. And in fact, Google Earth and Google Maps are becoming integrated. It's possible in the future that there'll be just one program out there called Maps or called Google Earth or whatever. But presently, Maps gives you directions and locations. Earth gives you information about those locations. So this is what you would learn if you were talking about geography. Everything from the geology, uh, the structure of the earth, to weather, to volcanoes and earthquakes, and economics and populations, and anything you can think of about the world that you would learn in a study of geography or whatever is contained on Google Earth in some format. So you can explore the entire world with overlays and even historical maps. And one of the things that Google does that's interesting is there's a sequence of events. Once again, this is explained in a different BYU online video about maps that shows how historical maps, including things like homesteads and other things, can be mapped directly onto Google Earth. So it's a very powerful tool for showing where things occurred and explaining relationships of how those things work. The key here, of course, is that we need to focus in on the geographic location of events and the history, because our ancestors may have had names that were very similar to other people who lived in the same area, and we may need to differentiate these people through their their very specific examination of their locations and the things where the events occurred. Okay, moving on. I'm going to talk about Docs for just a second. Google Docs, as I mentioned, is a online program. It's a word processing program with uh, rather basic functions. Some of the functions that you may be used to in using programs like Microsoft Word are conspicuously absent from Docs. Um, if you are the type of person who is somewhat frustrated by all of the choices and all of the intricacies of the more complicated word processing programs, then Docs is what I would call a very basic and straightforward program. It does quite a few things, but not necessarily as elegantly or as completely as some of the more complicated online offerings. But I would suggest this, that as you create documents in Docs, those documents are saved off to your Google Drive. So these programs work together. And as what happens is that all of these documents are then readily available to you on any computer or device that you are using. So if I create a document on Google Docs, it is automatically saved to Google. And if I go on to my Google Docs app on my iPhone, smartphone, I can view the document. So I do things like keep to-do lists, schedules, and all sorts of things here on Google Docs, along with all the documents I'm writing, letters and things like that. And then if I need to refer to them, I simply pull out my phone and look at it, which I just did a few minutes ago, as a matter of fact. So this is a very efficient way to manage documents. Do you trust Google? If you don't, make a copy of everything and put it down on your own hard drive. But there's, this is an alternative that you can explore. And as for genealogical purposes, obviously, if I'm sitting in most people have brought a long lists of paper, huge piles of paper with all of their various documents on them. By putting those documents into Google Docs or Google Drive, as we'll see in a moment, and bringing them. Then you don't have to carry all that paper with you when you go to the library or when you go to an archive or whatever. Except make sure you have internet connection when you get there. Very important. Okay, so it's basically free online word processing. There are a number of other options. You have spreadsheets, there are presentation program, Google Sheets it's called, and there's presentations and other programs, even a drawing program. So Google has sort of the Office selection of documents of simplified programs for people's use online. Okay, now we're going to just highlight Google Drive. Google Drive is just what they said it is. It's a hard drive, an online storage place. It obviously, there are a number of these. Microsoft has their OneDrive. We have Dropbox. We have all sorts of other online storage options, free, some of them subscription, some of them pay by the amount of information. Google is interesting in that it gives you up to 1 terabyte of free storage for all your documents. That is either an overwhelmingly large amount of information or a adequate amount, depending on where you are and the amount of information that you're producing, how much things you're putting online. They also have something called Google Photos, which gives you unlimited photo storage. You're not limited to 1 terabyte. You're not even limited on the number of photos you can put up. The good news is that that works up to about 16 megapixel pictures. Otherwise, Google cuts down the size of the images and sort of limits them. It doesn't mean that they're ruined or that they're cut or not usable or anything, but they're not kept at their full size. If you want to keep your images at their full size, full resolution or whatever, then there's a pay portion of Google that you can pay for additional storage that will let you store them at that higher level of quality. Okay, and the advantage here is, once again, you can access the documents from any device. It's just simple. You put a document into Google Drive, you upload it, it's there. You go to open it, and you can open it on your phone or on your iPad, your tablet, iPad, whatever device you happen to have. Question pops up about having 16 gigabytes of storage. You might want to check how you've signed into Google and investigate whether or not you can expand it to 1 terabyte. All I can say is the only thing I pay to Google is when I was originally doing the blogs and uploading a lot of photos for my blogs. I ran out of photo space and I paid for $5 a year, not $5 a month, but $5 a year, which I get billed once a year for the extra photo space. But my understanding, and that's what I have, every time I check on Google, I have a terabyte of space, so you might want to investigate that. Books, moving on to Google Books. We search Google has had originally had a goal to digitize every book ever published. Well, interesting. They estimated there were about 220 million plus books that had been published. Well, they were cranking along merrily, digitizing books and putting them up online. And then they got involved in a huge lawsuit by the Authors Guild in the United States, filed in the federal district court, alleging a violation of the author's copyrights, and that Google's use of putting the books online in the format that they did was violations of the fair use provision of the Copyright Act. Well, it was not, excuse me, fair use is not part of the Copyright Act. Fair use is a court-generated theory about usage of material in copyright. Anyway, that went to the federal district court, and Google won that lawsuit. It was appealed by the Authors Guild to the Court of Appeals, and Google once again won the lawsuit in the Court of Appeals. It was then appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied, wouldn't listen to the appeal, and so therefore Google is basically back with the ability to digitize books without having to worry about a big lawsuit. That means somebody else won't sue them, but won't sue Google, but right now they're pretty much putting up the books as they usually have before. Once again, just as we did with a Google search and with the images, we want to search by our ancestors' names or places. There's kind of an overall assumption. If I do a Google search, aren't I searching all the images and aren't I searching all the places and books and everything? And the answer is, well, yeah, but you may have like 500,000 or a million results from your search, and what you're looking for may be on page 2000 or something of the search results. So books focuses in a search just on the textual material that is in the Google Books website. So now what you do is you type in your names again, and you get a list of possible books. In this case, I got 180 results in about 0.36 seconds, and I can then examine each of those books for information about that particular ancestor. And you know, it's once again, it's possible that you get nothing, and on the other hand, you may be very, very surprised to find what you do find. There are over 30 million digitized books on Google. This really makes Google the largest library in the world. Granted, all of those materials are not freely accessible because there are 3 different types of views on Google. First of all, well, there's actually no view at all, which says we don't know anything about this book and we can't figure out what it is. But then if they know about the book, the first one is called Read, and it's a full text search and gives you a full textual copy of the book. And then there's Snippet View, which shows you little pieces of what you search for in the book to give you an idea of whether or not you want to make a greater effort at getting a copy of the book. And then they have Preview, which gives you sort of random stuff out of the book that also is intended to show you whether or not you would be interested in pursuing the book further. So if you look carefully at the results, you'll see that they come up saying either one of those. And I mentioned personally that this has all been declared fair use by the courts, and so Google can go ahead and do this. Now here's, for example, a book. I looked up that book that came up a couple of times before. It's called Henry Martin Tanner, Joseph City, Arizona Pioneer. And from here, in Google, it says there's no ebook available. Well, that's not necessarily true, actually. There are a lot of other libraries out in the world, and when Google says there's no ebook available, what they mean is that they don't have a copy of the book. That does not mean the book's not available in the electronic version. So I would keep looking for the book online. In this case, in this particular book, happens to be available from FamilySearch.org on the books section of their search, and they have the complete digitized copy of this particular book. But for research purposes, the next thing I would do here is to go look, unless I was interested in buying the book, in which case I can look on AbeBooks or Amazon. But then I would look in the Find in a Library. This link will look up the book in the WorldCat catalog. This is not a duplication of the Google search, because this is a search in library catalogs around the world, and over 2 billion catalog entries in WorldCat. Of the top 3 websites that I would use in every day of my life in doing research, WorldCat would be in the top 3. Google searches. Obviously, I use Google incessantly, but I'm also on WorldCat almost every day. Every time I refer to any kind of printed material or looking for anything, I run it through WorldCat to see if a library has it. In this case, I'm fortunate because, oh, I went too fast. The first library listed is the Brigham Young University Library, so this particular book's right here in the library. Um, so that's how we ended up with this. Okay, now we're going to move off to Google Scholar. Kind of have to speed up here a little bit. Um, this is exactly what it says. It searches scholarly papers and it's searching journals, articles. Now, if you're not familiar with academic journals and professional publications, probably you should be as a genealogist because genealogy has, genealogical community has some of these journals. But this generally is a way of looking further than you would normally find in a Google search. It's more of a focus search on a particular subject. So you can put in your ancestor's name again and do a search, in which case, oh, going back, you get a couple of options. You can look for articles, and then you can also look for case law. Now, this was the new addition to the Google Scholar that I hadn't focused on. I'm not sure quite when it was added, but it's been fairly recently. Basically, what this does is it allows you to have the searching capability of some of the major law databases out there to search all of the recorded cases in the federal and state courts in the United States. So you can search for your ancestors if they ever ended up in the federal or district or state courts where the decisions of the courts are recorded. That's called courts of record. Records where the court writes out a decision of its case. These are not trial courts. These are not the probate courts. These are not the lower courts. But if a case is appealed in the state court or in a federal court, it usually goes into a recorded decision, and those are available from the courts all throughout the United States. Interesting, as I was a trial attorney and as I did take a few cases over my long career as an attorney to the courts of appeal, I can put in my own name and come up with most of the cases I took to the courts right here on Google. So it's kind of interesting. It was a little bit fun. But anyway, so this is an amazing number of cases. I can't tell you. The library that contains this is called the Reporter System, and I can say that it is thousands and thousands and thousands of volumes of court cases that are searchable here on Google. The reason why, obviously, is because all this is in the public domain and there's nobody preventing them from putting all this stuff up online. So you may not have realized that you can actually search directly all of the different courts around the United States. And of course, scholarly papers. This is an interesting one. I just looked up a case that came to mind. It's called Reynolds versus United States in the U.S. Supreme Court, and it brought it right up. So you could look at Reynolds. Reynolds was known as the pivotal case back in the 1800s concerning polygamy, which of course impacted several of my ancestors. The scholarly papers, one thing that's important about it is that, oh, excuse me, back again, is that they also give you an automatic citation. So if you're worried about being cited, whether or not you're how to do the citation to all of these different things, then you just click on cite and it gives you a formatted citation, which, by the way, may not agree with your particular method of citing, but it is one way of getting into it. Blogs. As I mentioned, there are thousands of genealogy blogs out there. We have and probably will have other presentations on blogging and blogs but I would just remind you that they're out there. You can search for content in blogs. Once a blog is posted, it's searchable. And so if you're looking for your ancestors, you can always put the word blog after their name or after the information you're searching for to see if a blog happens to have any information about your ancestors. Important thing about that is that if someone's writing on a blog about your ancestor, they're probably related to you, uh, unless they just happen to be a historical figure or whatever. You can also create and write your own blog. Uh, I noticed here there's a typo. Sorry, typos do get by us. It should be own and not on blog. But basically, the idea here is that they're very simple for a blogger to start your blog and to publish your own information online. A lot of people are concerned about having others look and read what they've done. They say, well, how do I get this out to all my relatives? The answer is have a blog and let them all read it. And amazingly, it works. We have many contacts with relatives across the United States and the world as a result of our posting blogs about our family. And just as a matter, you might want to read a few genealogy blogs and get an idea of what people are concerned with and talking about, and be able to understand what's going on in the world. Last, we have YouTube. And I mentioned this at the beginning, and I'm mentioning it at the end because all of these particular presentations are going up on our YouTube channel, and this is the BYU, there's a screenshot here of the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. It's been an interesting process over the last couple of years as I started working at the Brigham Young University Family History Library to see how this has developed. We started by videoing some of the classes directly. That turned out to be kind of low quality, and we could have, I'm sure, improved the video quality by doing some work on the videography and everything. But basically, we found that webinars were a very effective way of communicating. And so what we've been doing here recently is putting up our short presentations, which are used to primarily to teach our volunteers and missionaries here who work at the BYU Family History Library. And we're also putting on longer webinars, and we'll continue to do so. And by going to the BYU Family History Library website on byu.edu, then you will be able to see the current schedule and future schedules for all the webinars that we'll be putting on. This summer has been a little bit slow because of various university scheduling, like semesters and other things going on here at BYU. But when we get back into the fall, we'll be on a full schedule again of webinars. Here's some of the other things important to understand is that all of the major genealogy companies, organizations, associations, everybody have their own BYU, have their own YouTube channel. So you can go out there and look for Family Search YouTube channel and see all their videos and see Ancestry's videos, see MyHeritage's videos, see Find My Past videos. All of those different organizations, everybody out there, big and small, and hundreds of others have YouTube channels. So you might want to check that out as far as educational opportunities and just general interest. Some of them are entertaining even. And there's always more. There's always more things you can do with Google, and there's always more apps and more applications and programs and things to learn about. Don't get discouraged. Don't get overwhelmed. It's but be aware that there are always new things out there that might help. I've been in the process the last 2 years of basically reorienting and weeding out and redeveloping different ways of doing things. And my entire method of work has changed over the last couple of years, simply because of changes in technology and because of my desire to implement those changes in a way that would benefit me in being able to do more work in less time and do it more effectively. And now if we could just have something that would pick out all my typos and other things, I just love it. Anyway, that might never happen. Thanks for watching. We appreciate your coming to the BYU webinars.